On a gloomy afternoon in an old park tucked in the heart of the city, a small black girl named Luciana quietly watched a man sitting in deep thought on a weathered bench. He wore ragged clothes, his face weathered by the sun, his beard scruffy. But his eyes, they held her gaze, deep as the ocean and filled with a sorrow that had no name. Have you ever met someone whose eyes alone made you want to help them, even if you had no idea who they were? Luciana was only 12, but her heart had been toughened by a life of scarcity. Without hesitation, she walked over and handed him the half of a peanut butter sandwich still in her hand. "I think you're hungry," she said softly, her voice as light as a breeze. The man looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. It was clear he wasn't used to kindness. "That's your lunch, isn't it?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle, like a cello in the still of night. Luciana smiled faintly, hiding the hunger gnawing in her stomach. "I'm not very hungry." The truth was, it was her only meal of the day. Ever since her grandmother had fallen ill, life had become harder than ever. The man took the sandwich half with hesitation, then asked, "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Luciana shrugged. "My grandma always said, when you don't have much, that's when sharing really means something. Would you agree that kindness doesn't live in your wallet, it lives in your heart?" She noticed his hands, dirt-stained but nails neatly trimmed, and the palms didn't look rough like most unhoused people. Something didn't quite add up. "What's your name?" he asked, with sincere curiosity in his eyes. Luciana Ribeiro," she answered, pointing to the worn-down apartment complex across the plaza. "I live over there." The man took a small bite, chewing slowly like it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. "This is the best sandwich I've ever had." Luciana giggled. "It's just peanut butter. That's the only thing we had left in the pantry this week." Right then, the wail of a police siren rang from afar. The man suddenly tensed, his eyes clouded with concern. "I have to go," he said quickly, carefully tucking the rest of the sandwich into his coat. "Thank you, Luciana Ribeiro." Can a single small act change the course of an entire life? "Murphy said you gave him something priceless recently," said attorney Marcus, as he and Luciana walked into apartment 3B. Luciana frowned. "That can't be. I don't even know anyone named Eduardo." When they explained everything to Miss Denise, the kind neighbor who was caring for Luciana, Marcus pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Moments later, he handed the phone to Luciana. "Hello?" she asked, holding it cautiously. The voice on the other end nearly stopped her heart. "You might remember 3 days ago you gave half a peanut butter sandwich to a man in the park." Luciana's eyes widened. She could hardly breathe. It was him. The man from the park. But now his voice was confident and commanding, like that of a powerful executive. Those deep ocean blue eyes, unmistakable. Could a sandwich really change a destiny? No one in that struggling neighborhood could have imagined that one child's simple act of kindness would be the beginning of an extraordinary journey. A story where the unconditional compassion of a forgotten child became the light that guided a man who held the world in his hands. If this story touched your heart, follow our channel for more true human stories, where real connections create real miracles that money could never buy. "Is this Eduardo?" Luciana asked, staring at the photo on Marcus's phone. It showed a well-dressed man in a suit, clean-shaven, smiling at a charity event. Except for his striking blue eyes, he looked completely different. "That's him," Marcus nodded. "He often does social experiments to observe how people react when they don't know who they're really meeting." 2 days later, Miss Denise escorted Luciana to Eduardo Voscaños's estate, a grand mansion nestled in lush suburbs. As the silver Rolls-Royce passed through the automatic gates, both women held their breath. The stone-paved driveway wound through gardens so perfect, they looked like something from a fairy tale. "Remember," Denise whispered, "don't touch anything expensive." Luciana rolled her eyes. "How would I know what's expensive? Everything looks like it belongs in a museum." Inside, the mansion was even more dazzling. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, original artwork on every wall. But what surprised Luciana most was the man who came to greet her. Eduardo, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, looked more like a kind uncle than the CEO of a massive corporation. "Luciana," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. Today I wanted a chance to meet you properly." Lunch passed gently, with quiet, attentive service from the staff. As they ate, Eduardo shared that he too had once lived in poverty before building his life from the ground up. "Once a year," he said, "I live as if I'm invisible in society. No name, no money, just to remind myself where I came from and to see how people really treat others." Luciana listened intently, while Miss Denise was still dazzled by the glimmering silverware. "In 3 weeks of wandering, you were the only one who gave me something, without asking for anything in return," Eduardo said, his voice warm but filled with emotion. "That touched my heart." Then came an offer that left both Miss Denise and Luciana stunned. He would cover all of her grandmother's medical expenses at the best private hospital in the city. He would also guarantee a full scholarship for Luciana at a prestigious school. And beyond that, he had arranged for a comfortable new apartment so they could finally have a real home. Luciana stared at him, half in disbelief. "Why are you doing this for us?" "What would you do if you were Eduardo, after receiving such a small but sincere act of kindness?" Luciana kept staring. Eduardo smiled calmly, but her mind was spinning. Growing up on the tough streets, she had learned one thing: nothing comes for free. Eduardo seemed to understand. "Think of it as an investment in a person of rare character," he said softly. Miss Denise nodded rapidly, already imagining how to retell this bizarre story to her neighbors. Luciana remained quiet. Her gaze studied him, not with suspicion, but with the intuition of someone who had lived too much. She was trying to see where his kindness came from. The following week, Luciana's grandmother was transferred to a private specialty hospital. When the doctor explained there was a real chance of recovery, she smiled. The first smile Luciana had seen in months of tears. Her heart swelled, but the door that had just opened was about to lead her into a greater challenge. Her new school, fenced with white iron bars and filled with blooming gardens, was the place she felt most out of place. Clad in a brand new uniform, her brown skin and regional accent made her an easy target. "What charity program are you from?" a blonde girl sneered on the first day, prompting the group to burst into laughter. "Your mom's," Luciana shot back, so fast even she was surprised. "Have you ever used sharp wit to hide your pain?" The only person who treated her with kindness was Miss Helena, the literature teacher. One day, finding Luciana hiding in the library during recess, she didn't ask questions, she just sat beside her. "Whenever I was your age," she whispered, "I didn't fit in either, but I found friends in books, ones that never judged or shut me out." From then on, Helena became her teacher, her mentor, her companion. She began giving Luciana advanced books, encouraging her to write. "You have a rare voice," she told her, "and voices like yours deserve to be heard by the world." Meanwhile, on the other side of success, Eduardo was facing his own storm. Within his family, Ricardo, his eldest son and heir to the Vasconal Empire, was far from pleased with his father's attention to a girl from the slums. Dad always needs a lost cause to save, like it's some kind of virtue project, Ricardo sneered to his mother, Daniela, Eduardo's ex-wife. First that dumb Amazon project, now this kid, and we're the ones stuck dealing with the fallout. But Ricardo didn't realize. Luciana had started watching. Outwardly shy and obedient, she was quietly building a plan. In the months that followed, she listened to the careless remarks when people assumed she wasn't paying attention. She took note of contradictions in Ricardo's stories. With Ms. Helena's subtle guidance, she wasn't just studying math, literature, and science. She was learning about power, systems, and what builds or breaks an empire. "Knowledge is power," Helena often said, unaware that her student was preparing to wield it like a scalpel. One cold, rainy afternoon, waiting for her ride in the library, Luciano overheard Ricardo's voice in the next room. He was talking to a man she didn't recognize. The voices were low, but words like bembezzlement, offshore transfers, and "my dad will never find out" rang clear. Luciana's eyes changed. Behind the soft gaze was a sharp mind, already setting plans in motion. If Ricardo saw her as nothing more than a feel-good charity project for his father, then he had grossly underestimated Luciana Ribeiro. The girl who once lived off crumbs on a sidewalk, who once fought just to keep her grandmother alive, now had something she'd never dared to dream of: opportunity and leverage. "Some people think kindness is weakness," she whispered to herself, slipping quietly away before anyone noticed. But what happens when the kind-hearted decide they're done playing the supporting role in someone else's story? 1 year after that fateful conversation in the library, Luciana, now 13, had transformed into someone else entirely. Not only was she a top student, she possessed skills far beyond her age. Finance, accounting, risk analysis, all thanks to online courses quietly funded by Ms. Helena. "A girl your age, interested in financial statements?" Ms. Helena had exclaimed after reading Luciana's razor-sharp analysis of corporate fraud. "But I can't deny it, you got a gift for numbers." Luciana simply smiled. "Let's just say it's a necessary skill in the real world." In the beautiful home Eduardo had provided, her now recovered grandmother noticed a quiet shift in her granddaughter. "You're always watching," she said, "like you're planning something." Luciana gently squeezed her hand. "I'm just learning, Grandma. A lot." But no one knew that she had been carefully building a detailed map of Ricardo's shady dealings. Every time she visited the Vasconos estate, Luciana used the Wi-Fi to gather data, log financial anomalies, and store everything in an encrypted cloud system. And then the opportunity arrived. Eduardo's 60th birthday, a lavish gala filled with the elite, politicians, business moguls, judges. Dressed in a sleek gown chosen by Ms. Helena, Luciana entered the grand hall with the poise of a young woman, mature, sharp, and unrecognizably elegant. Ricardo, champagne in hand, approached her, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You look pretty comfortable here, almost like you actually belong." Luciano met his eyes. "Maybe. I belong here more than you think." Ricardo laughed. "Look around, kid. These are the people who run this country. Politicians, CEOs, power players. No matter how much my father pours into you, you'll always be the sandwich girl." Luciana's eyes flashed like lightning in a storm. "Funny that you mention investments," she said softly, "because you've made quite a few of your own, especially in the Cayman Islands." Ricardo's grip tightened on his glass. The liquid inside trembled. "What the hell are you talking about?" Project Cascada, Luciana said calmly, every word like a blade. The operation you used to funnel illegal funds out of your father's company via a network of offshore accounts. I have the emails, the wire transfers, and even recorded conversations. She paused, then added, all while you were sitting in meetings with politicians, blocking the public health initiative your father tried to launch. Ricardo went pale as paper. You're bluffing, he whispered, eyes darting like a man caught in the act. You're just a 13-year-old girl. What could you possibly do? I'm the 13-year-old girl you completely underestimated, Luciana said, never breaking eye contact. The kid from the slums you mocked for a year, while I watched your every move and learned everything. Just then, Eduardo approached, smiling politely, but his eyes narrowed at the tense exchange between his son and the girl he'd come to see as family. Everything okay here? He asked. Perfectly, Luciana smiled. In fact, I was just about to request a private conversation with you, Ricardo, and myself. There's something important I need to share. Inside Eduardo's elegant office, Luciana connected her tablet to the display system. Ricardo stood stiff as stone, while Eduardo settled into his chair, curious. What is this, Luciana? The truth, sir, she replied calmly, and began her presentation, clear, precise, without hesitation. For the next hour, Luciana laid out the intricate scheme Ricardo had orchestrated. Funds disguised as investments, offshore accounts, bribes to sabotage Eduardo's philanthropic initiatives, and a calculated plan to dethrone his own father from the company's leadership. This can't be real, Eduardo muttered, his face drained as document after document, email after audio recording played, unquestionable evidence. Shut up, Ricardo snapped, losing control. He lunged toward Luciana, face twisted in rage. But Eduardo rose swiftly, blocking him. You're just a no-name slum girl, a liar who tricked my father, Ricardo screamed. Luciana remained astonishingly composed. The difference between you and me, Ricardo, is that I don't have to lie. Every piece of evidence here is real, including the conversation you just had, also recorded. Eduardo sank into his chair as if the air had left his body. Why, Ricardo, why would you do all this? Because you're destroying everything, Ricardo exploded. You built an empire, and now you're throwing it away on charity projects, and some street girl, someone has to save the company from you. Silence fell over the room. Eduardo stared at his son, as if truly seeing him for the first time. You call this an empire, he said quietly. I built all of this so I could do what I couldn't when I was poor. And you've become exactly the kind of man I spent my whole life fighting against. Eduardo turned to Luciana, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me when you first found out? Luciana lowered her gaze, then looked up with sorrow in her eyes. Because I needed irrefutable proof. And because, she looked at Ricardo, because I know what it feels like to lose your family. I didn't want to be the reason you lost your son, unless I was absolutely certain. Tears finally streamed down Eduardo's cheeks. He nodded slowly, his voice hoarse but firm. Tomorrow, Ricardo, you will withdraw from all operations at Vosco's Corporation. Your shares will be frozen until the investigation is complete, and if there are criminal charges, which based on the evidence is likely, you will have to face the law, Eduardo declared, his voice striking like a gavel. You can't do this. I'm your only heir, Ricardo shouted in desperation. No, Eduardo replied, his eyes like cold steel. An heir isn't someone born into a family. It's someone who upholds and honors its values. You had everything, Ricardo. Opportunity, privilege, the best education, and you chose to use it all to destroy what others built." Ricardo stormed out, the office door slamming behind him. In the heavy silence that followed, Eduardo remained seated, his gaze lost in space. Luciana stood nearby, unsure of what to say. How did you know all this?" he finally asked, almost as if speaking to himself. "The same way I survived on the streets," Luciana answered softly. "By observing, listening, never underestimating anyone. By learning how the system works and how to survive inside it." Eduardo studied the girl before him, no longer the hungry child he had once helped, but a remarkable young woman, intelligent, principled, and fearless, qualities he rarely saw in adults in the world of power. "When we first met, I thought I was helping you," he said with a bittersweet smile. "I never imagined you'd be the one to save me." That night, as the music of his birthday party played downstairs, two people, a billionaire who thought he controlled everything, and a girl who once had nothing but half a sandwich, redrew the future together. Hours later, in her room, Luciana stood at the window, gazing at the glittering city lights. Not long ago, she had been a hungry child offering her last meal to a stranger. Now, she had changed the fate of an entire financial empire. And the question was no longer, what will happen to the poor girl Eduardo Vasconcelos once helped? But rather, what will happen to the Vasconcelos empire when it's led by someone who understands the true value of money and of a simple, kind act? 5 years later, Luciana Ribeiro, now 17, walked confidently through the hallways of the Vasconcelos Foundation headquarters. No longer the timid child she once was, she had become a brilliant young leader, respected by employees and executives alike. The scholarship program she helped found had supported over 100 children from underprivileged communities across the nation. "Meeting with the Department of Education at 2 p.m., her assistant Sophia reminded her. "They want to scale our foundation's model to the entire public school system." Luciana nodded, skimming her schedule, calm and focused like a seasoned CO. Across town, in a small rental apartment, Ricardo Vasconcelos sat surrounded by unpaid bills, his eyes weary. The empire he once believed was his now operated partly under the leadership of the girl from the slums he used to scorn. You see, every wound can become the start of a turning point, and sometimes a peanut butter sandwich, offered at the right time to the right person, can change the course of the world. After his crimes were exposed, Ricardo faced criminal charges. Thanks to a plea deal negotiated by Eduardo to avoid greater public fallout, he retained only a fraction of his wealth and was barred from holding any executive role for 10 years. His ex-wife and children cut all ties with him. "My father asked me to check if you need anything," Eduardo's lawyer said during a monthly visit. Ricardo declined coldly. Pride was all he had left, though it was also what had cost him everything. Back at the Vasconcelos Foundation boardroom, Eduardo and Luciana reviewed the latest quarterly financial report. They were no longer benefactor and beneficiary. Their bond had evolved into a strong partnership, rooted in mutual respect and shared vision. "These numbers are impressive," Eduardo said, eyes scanning the charts. "The public school financial literacy program is showing real results." "Because we teach from experience," Luciana explained. "When you grow up in scarcity, you learn to strategize just to survive. Now that skill has become a tool for education." Luciana's grandmother Marta stepped into the room. At 73, she now served as the Foundation's community outreach coordinator, using her lifetime of wisdom to guide vulnerable families. "Children's Hospital just called," she announced. "They want to expand their intensive care unit. They said our governance model helped reduce admin costs by 40%. Eduardo smiled, his eyes shimmering with memory. Who would have thought that half a peanut butter sandwich could lead to all this? Luciana returned the smile. It wasn't the sandwich, Eduardo. It was that you saw a human being when the rest of the world only saw a bird. That afternoon, during the Foundation's annual event, Luciana stepped onto the stage to introduce the new class of scholarship recipients. As she spoke, her eyes caught a familiar figure standing quietly at the back of the room, Ricardo. He looked thinner, older, silently observing. But Luciana's words carried no bitterness. All of us face choices, choices that define who we are. Some choose to hoard power at all costs. Others choose to give, even when they have little. In the smallest decisions of our daily lives, our true nature is revealed. After the event, Luciana approached Ricardo, who remained still as if awaiting judgment. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said, eyes avoiding hers. "I don't expect forgiveness." "It's not about forgiveness, Ricardo," Luciana replied, her voice gentle as the wind. "It's about who we choose to be from this moment forward. If you truly want to contribute something good, there's always room here for everyone." As Ricardo walked away, Eduardo came over. "You never cease to surprise me," he said. "You just gave him a chance he didn't deserve." Luciana smiled. "I learned it from you, that day, in the park. You could have just handed me money and walked away, but instead, you saw what no one else did. Potential, not statistic." Later that evening, in her private office, Luciana stood by the large window, quietly watching the city lights below. The same view had once belonged to Ricardo, but to her, it wasn't about power or position. To Luciana, that view was a reminder that true power doesn't come from being at the top. It comes from the responsibility we bear for those without a voice. Behind her, on the wall, hung a simple framed photo, half a peanut butter sandwich. Not a decoration, but a symbol, a daily reminder that wealth lies not in what we own, but in what we're willing to give, even when no one is watching. Luciana's journey, from a girl who shared her only meal with a stranger to a woman who transformed systems and opened doors for hundreds, wasn't just a story of individual triumph. It was living proof that when we see the human being in every person, regardless of appearance or circumstance, we ignite a quiet revolution, one no amount of money can buy. What do you think? If you've ever believed that small acts can reshape reality, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue uncovering more heartfelt stories where seemingly ordinary choices hold extraordinary power. Because in the moments we least expect it, kindness can change everything. Sarah wiped her tears openly now, not bothering to hide them. Sam slapped Marcus hard on the back, nearly sending him forward. Kevin, the young driver Marcus had helped change a tire for a few months back, stepped forward, hands trembling as he unrolled a large sheet of paper. "We had a little idea," he said, eyes cast down. "Hope you don't mind." Paper turned around. It was a design for a new sign. Everwind Haven, a light for every traveler. Marcus stood still, his eyes blurred. Each letter swam in the soft morning light. He thought of Trina, of the nights they dreamed together about this place. Not for money, not for fame, but because they believed in a world where someone would open their door when the storm came, trusting that one day someone else would do the same for them. Behind him, the CB crackled to life, a hiss of static, then a voice, warm and clear, echoing from somewhere out on the road. "Breaker 19, anybody picking up Everwind? Heard the lights are still on over there." Marcus leaned close to the mic, heart pounding, his voice steady as a transmission tower. "This is Everwind," he said, his words rolling across miles of road, through snow, through the quiet pockets of the world. And the lights are still on. 1 year later, Everwine Cafe was no longer the weary roadside diner, battered by that storm. But if you look closely, you could still see the old bones, still hear the stubborn heart beating beneath its fresh coat of paint. The parking lot had been expanded, room for 20 semi-trucks to rest. New pole lights burned all night long. A small lounge had been added to the side for drivers. Hot showers, soft couches, a few worn pool tables donated by drivers. Better here than gathering dust in the basement. Inside, the cafe had been renovated, not stripped and changed, but restored with dignity. The counter gleamed with a fresh coat of varnish. The leather booths were patched and holed again. The walls were painted a soft cream that brightened the space, yet the floor still creaked with the weight of old stories it refused to let go. But the biggest change wasn't something you could see. It was something you could feel the moment you stepped through the door. Everwind was no longer just a diner. It had become something more, something alive, a true home, for those who measure life in miles, in hours, and in long, quiet roads that stretch between destinations. Laughter returned, steady, gentle, like a stream trickling through the walls. The scent of bacon and strong coffee wrapped around you like a warm blanket. And through it all, the old CB radio kept humming. Voices from every direction rolled in. News, greetings, jokes, road warnings. A living soundtrack from people who now saw Everwind as an essential stop. Have you ever dreamed of a place like that? If this story touched you, leave a thought, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help us keep spreading stories that inspire.